they were who they were. When Jesus comes into their life, Jesus gives them an identity, and then he gives them a purpose. Right? So whenever we think about why am I a Christian, we answer those two questions. What is my identity now, and what is my purpose? What does God call me to do? What is God sending me to do? Right? And so we'll see that here in our text this morning. What Jesus does when he calls the 12 and what purpose he gives them. So this is Mark 13 through 19. We'll play the video, we'll read the text, and then we'll hear our thoughts.
Chapter 60. Follow the leader. Mark 3. Jesus had people crowding around him all the time. But being popular with crowds is not the same as having committed followers. Some people are curious about Jesus. Some people like to get things from Jesus. Other people really want to follow Jesus. A follower of Jesus is called a disciple. There are millions of them today. Jesus started with 12. One day early in his ministry, Jesus went up on a mountain and called 12 men to follow him. It wasn't their idea to start a Jesus club. It was Jesus' idea to start a group of disciples. He would be their leader, their teacher, their savior, and their friend. 12 might seem like a funny number. Why not 3 disciples? Or 10? Or 100? Why 12? So they could share a dozen donuts? Or so they could each have one slice from an extra large pizza? Jesus chose 12 disciples because he was forming a new people with himself at the center. There were 12 tribes in Israel, and there would be 12 disciples of Jesus. From now on, to be a part of God's family meant being a follower of Jesus. The 12 disciples were all men, and they were all Jews. They spoke the same language, and they grew up with many of the same things. But they were also very different. Peter, Andrew, James, and John were fishermen. Peter was bold but made a lot of mistakes. James and John could be hotheads. Andrew liked bringing people to Jesus. Matthew was a tax collector. Simon was a revolutionary. That means Matthew worked for the government and Simon didn't work for the government. Bartholomew, also called Nathaniel, could be very blunt. Thomas, who was a twin, would become famous for his doubts. Then there was Philip, who helped Nathaniel see Jesus. There were also Thaddeus and another James. Finally, there was Judas, who ended up betraying Jesus. That's 12 men, probably wondered at times if they had anything in common except that they were following Jesus. Jesus named his disciples apostles because they would eventually be sent out to the nations to make new disciples. But for now, Jesus gave them 3 things to do. They would preach, they would cast out demons, and they would be with Jesus. We might say they announced the coming of the snake crusher. They showed the power of the snake crusher, and they spent time with the snake crusher. Not a bad job, with or without pizza.
chapter 3, verse 13 through 19. Jesus went up the mountain and summoned those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, to be with him, to send them out to preach, and to have authority to drive out demons. He appointed the 12. To Simon he gave the name Peter, and to James, the son of Zebedee, and to his brother John he gave the name Boanerges, that is, sons of John, Andrew, Philip, and Bartholomew, Matthew, and Thomas, James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who also was betrayed. So we'll look at those verses today. And then there's some questions at the bottom that kind of help guide us. But I'll give you a minute to just read it again, and then you can ask questions and share your thoughts. Start. Anything that you like, anything confusing? How would you paraphrase what happened?
So why Jesus gave them new names?
Not all new names, some new names. Wait, what name? Possibly. Maybe not to not confuse.
There were 2 Simons, there were 2 Jameses.
Yeah. I mean, to have different names is to have to differentiate. The text doesn't say, anything else beyond that. If it did, it would tell us.
Just the personality, the name, and the person.
Possibly.
And sometimes, the name and the personality.
I mean, it didn't say, but every time like Saul, new name for Paul. Abraham became Abraham. Sarah, Sarai, Sarah. But you see the old and the new. Like, each are called to faith. When each is called to faith, they got their own name. There's new name.
Yeah. But then, yeah, I can see that. Then the question is, well, what about me? How come he hasn't given me anything? Right? What makes them special that they get a name and then I don't get it? Then how do they get it?
Give you a new identity.
Is that one?
Give you a new identity.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. It's not that he gives a specific name. I'll make Marlon Mike or Martin, Elliot. But I think what God's trying to communicate is, I give you an identity. Your name may be your name, but who you are is no longer who you are. What else stuck out to you? Our little question. How can you mention the 12?
12 nations. Not a lot. Only 12.
Yeah, why not 15? Why not 30? Why not 2? Yeah. So there's a word in English when you study, when you read in your English class, it's called illusion. Not illusion like magic trick, but A F-U-S-I-O-N. So allusions are references to what we have that happened earlier. Right? So remember, the Bible is a book, it's a story. And there are things that God chooses to write, and there are things He chooses not to write. Like for example, if I say, I want to know the history of dinosaurs. The Bible is not a book about dinosaurs, so it's not going to talk about that. Right? The Bible's going to talk about what it is meant to talk about. So these words, like allusion, whenever you see mountain, that should make you think, when did we see mountains? Right? Then you go to the Old Testament and Moses goes up the mountain. Right? And what was Moses doing with God at the mountain? Right? And then you've got, so you say, what could this be alluding to? Right? 12. When's the last time you saw the number 12? Right? So it doesn't say specifically, Jesus went up the mountain because I want to show you that this points back to when Moses goes up the mountain. But whenever you can trace these themes in the Bible, it can help you understand maybe what's going on. Right? So the 12, it could be the 12 nations of Israel. Right? That was chosen. But so, we want to look for those allusions as we read. And that's what makes the Bible so beautiful, is that you have over 40 authors that are able to tell one story over 1,600 years of the Bible being together. So that's pretty incredible. How can they do that? But it's God who does it. What other questions do you have, or what stuck out to you? What did you like, or what did you find hard to understand?
It says here, He summoned those He wanted. He
Yeah.
specifically chose them, each one, wisdom with intention.
Right?
He didn't just say, no, He gave them.
How does that make you feel knowing that Jesus chooses who He wants? Because that could mean He also chooses or there are those that He does not want. So how does that make you feel? What's that?
Like He chose them.
Right?
We already know what is already planned,
Okay.
God knows individually that, in the future, like the one would betray him, the other one maybe, lead the people of Israel.
I'm so like, but He chose him. Hey, you can be messed up, you can betray me, but I choose to. I still love you, and I want you to be a part of this 12. Not just He chose you, but man, the important part is like He chose to be 12 this time, one of the 12 disciples. So He loves you despite what you're going to do to me. I feel like.
He also chose for a purpose. He come for a purpose to save us, but He also chose, the last one, the one of Judah, chose him for the purpose of because he can betray him, and that's how he can go to the cross. So there's a purpose behind every decision that we make.
That means He loves him. He loves Judas.
He loved him too.
He loves Judas.
Yeah, but we have to be careful with that because
But he's like, he had a chance to be saved.
and He was not.
Yeah, he had a chance to say that he didn't want to.
Yeah, we have to be careful with that statement because in order for God to be just, a good judge, then He has to judge the innocent innocent and the guilty guilty. If there's a judge who says you are guilty, but I judge you right, I don't like that judge. Right? If there's someone who is guilty of murder, but the judge says no, you're free, I don't want that judge to be my judge. So yes, Jesus chose Judas. However, Judas betrays Jesus, and he is guilty for what he does. But did Jesus not care for him? Absolutely, Jesus did care for him, right? And He walked with him, and He shared with him. And that should mean something to us. How can Jesus do that to someone He knows is going to betray him? And then the question becomes, would you do that to someone? My Pastor Klein preached a whole series on someone hard to love. Would you spend time with someone you would know in a month is going to betray you? That person who will or does possibly betray you, they are wrong for what they're doing. Okay? But yes, Jesus does love it.
When it comes to the altar, they know I do check in, I tell you to the altar, it's the fee, know the, know that I'll come out here, I mean, and some of you may not live, you do good, deep understanding, overlooking, but still not see your heart.
Other questions y'all have?
Like I said, God is what Jesus was, and we have a purpose in role. Somehow I wonder if it's fair for you to be that role.
That's a great question. What do you think?
God didn't make him, he chose to be. I don't know.
Okay, let me ask you like this. God had a purpose for Satan. There's a purpose for Satan. Would you want to be Satan? Why not? God has a purpose for Judas. Now, would you want to be Judas?
I mean, if he was us, he wanted to be saved too, like he got a role to play. So it's like, you don't win in his role, no matter what you want to do.
That's a great question, right? From our point of view, it's like, yeah, that's not fair. Okay, let us ask this question. I was born in America. I did not go to the Khmer route. Would you say to me, well, that's not fair? Then my response would be, I didn't control where I was born. So then the question becomes, how much control do you have? But that's how we like to think. I am in control of my story of my life. I am the author. I write my story. But this says something different. God is the author. God writes the story. Yeah, there are people who live like that. I don't like what God writes. And so what do? They reject it. It's a hard story. Yeah. What do you think?
It reminded me of a ridiculous story I saw on the news on the phone. There's this guy, he's 40 something, and he sued his parents because he didn't ask to be born.
Yeah.
So he wanted his parents to be